Welcome. This is the session called Rogue Capitalism and People's Struggles, Pushing Back Against the Financialization of Territories and Nature. Some of you may be intrigued by that title, Rogue Capitalism, and we've got a lot of feedback on that from different people, some who are very pleased by it and enticed to know more, others who are a bit skeptical of that term, but that's our intention. We wanted to make it intentionally provocative to encourage also reactions and further discussion on it. And we'll be sharing a bit more about what we mean by that term and the sort of framing around it. And most importantly, we'll be hearing from our great panelists a bit about how rogue capitalism has very real on-the-ground impacts and for people, for people's livelihoods, for nature. And we'll also be hearing a bit about how they resist also the impacts of rogue capitalism in their different contexts. So I will just say a few words by way of introduction before handing it over to my co-moderators. So my name is Sylvia Kay. I work at the Transnational Institute, and together with Shamali Goutal from Focus on the Global South and Philip Zeufert from FIAN International, we organized this session. This session, for those of you who haven't been enjoying the nearly week-long program now of the AEPF, the Asia-Europe People's Forum, it's taking place within the context of the AEPF 13. And for those of you that don't know, AEPF is a people-to-people solidarity network between Asian and European social movements and civil society organizations. Every 2 years, there's a big gathering that is convened, alternating between Asia and Europe. Now, of course, taking place online because of the pandemic. So just a few points of information and some basic housekeeping rules. This webinar will be recorded and will be made available later on the APF website. For our friends who speak Khmer, there is interpretation available into Khmer. All speakers will be speaking English, but you have the possibility to listen into Khmer. You can do so by clicking on the globe icon in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen and selecting your preferred language. So the format that this workshop will take is that we will have 2 rounds of interventions from our speakers. We've encouraged our speakers not to prepare any PowerPoint presentations or long speeches. Rather, it'll be a more interactive talk show type format with some probing questions from our moderators, followed then by what we hope will also be a lively question and answer session. So do make use of the Q&A box. There's a specific Q&A box in this webinar where you can pose your questions and then we can select them to pose to the panelists. Also, do feel free to make liberal use of the chat box to your right-hand side of your screen in the column there to share any comments or reactions, things that you strongly agree with, things perhaps you strongly disagree with. And also do let us know who you are in the chat box. If you want to introduce yourself by sharing your name, your organization and country, it's always nice to know, even in this virtual setting, who's present in the room. So without further ado, that's just my short opening to this webinar. I will now hand over to my co-moderator, Philip Zeufert from FIAN International, and he will say a little bit more about this concept of rogue capitalism. So Philip, I'm sure we're all intrigued and want to hear a little bit more before we hear from our panelists.
Yes, thank you so much, Sylvia. Welcome to everyone, also from my side. As Sylvia said, I work with FIAN International, and we're happy to organize this event today together with our friends from TNI and focus on the Global South. I just want to take a few minutes before we start to maybe say a bit more about today's topic that we discussed, and as you have seen in the program, and as Sylvia said, there are some concepts in there. Maybe it's good that we kind of say a bit something about that so that we know what we are talking about. So I will just share my screen. Okay, give me just a second. Here we are. I hope you can see my screen now. The one word, we speak about financialization, but what does that mean? The way we understand that is it's a distinct form of capitalism. It's a way to describe like the current form um, of capitalism. And what is special about it, or what is particular about it, is that um, um, that that it's characterized by a dominance of global finance over the productive economy, right? Um, we have financial markets increasingly important, and we see that like also in our everyday lives. When you read the news, read about financial markets, how they react to crises, for example, the COVID crisis, but also others, and that has major impact on the productive economy. This means that profits are increasingly generated in the sphere of financial markets, and are not, are not linked exclusively anymore to production, to agriculture, to services. And finance capitalism obeys or follows a logic which is based on quick returns and the logic of, make more money out of money. So again, it's not like how much you produce, but it's kind of, you create tools to make money out of money, and that is implicitly it's intrinsically speculative. And the last thing I want to say is that finance capitalism is also not coming out of nowhere, right? These developments and these things have roots, and they are rooted in neoliberal policies and deregulations over the last decades, starting in the 1970s, more or less. What I want to show now is what you see on the screen now is just to give you an idea. When I say why, what does it mean that finance dominates the economy? What you see here is a bit how global financial assets have developed as compared to the global GDP, right? So you see a development from 1980s on the left side until 2010, and you see that there is a small dot, the small gray dot, that's the global GDP, so that's the global economy, and then you have the green dot, which are the global financial assets. So that's the the assets that are traded on financial markets. And what you see is that the share of the global financial assets increase much more than the global GDP. And if you do that further, this graph stops in 2010, but this development has continued. And I think in 2018, it was around, we had at least 500 trillion financial assets. So this means there is like this huge amount of money flying around, right? And this money has to be invested somewhere. And so what does finance capitalism do? It basically, like, what happens is like four things. The first one is like all this money, this kind of virtual wealth, it needs to be put somewhere. It needs to be invested somewhere, right? And so the first thing is that, financial actors, they create all kinds of new asset classes. So that's on the left side up. So like things like land, water, forests, they have become assets, and we know that, but it doesn't. It's a significant development, right? It's something that that it's considered as an asset. In order to kind of use those assets, the second thing that has happened is to create new financial instruments. It's things that we read, and we often, most of those of us who are not experts on financial issues, we don't always understand, these futures and derivatives and these kinds of things, which are basically, kind of, things that have been invented to make it possible to kind of trade those new asset classes on international markets, because it's not a given that you can buy, an investor sitting in Singapore or New York can buy land in somewhere in Vietnam or wherever. Those assets are created or are exchanged, are sold, there are all kinds of interactions and transactions on specific markets that have been created specifically for this. That's what we heard about financial markets, and we think about kind of stock markets, but they're different as well. And perhaps one of the most visible things that happens is that there are all kinds of new actors that kind of interact on these things. So actors that you didn't necessarily associate with things like agriculture before, like pension funds buying farmland, or pension funds or investment funds buying shares of agribusiness companies. So that's a bit the logic of what happened, and obviously it's like a very simplified. And all of this is usually, or it's often referred to as financialization, right? But when we, as the organizations that are organizing this, we work a lot with small-scale food producers, and we had a lot of discussions on kind of what was happening to them and what was happening in their territories. And at some point, we came to a point where we said, okay, financialization, that might be a good term to describe it, but actually it's not a good term to describe what it implies. We need a stronger term to do it. And after some discussions, we came up with this term, rogue capitalism. And why do we say rogue capitalism? The first thing is that it's this aspect of being very illegitimate and extracting wealth from people in their communities and territories. The second aspect is the violence that it entails, the dispossession it creates, and the destruction of ecosystems and other things. And it's also important part of it is also that all the involved actors that I mentioned, they actively seek to hide their operations and avoid regulations. So, kind of they hide, you don't see the finances, right? You see who is operating on the ground, but all behind that is a whole, are different investors that hide their wealth away in tax havens, for example. And I think what is important also is that when we have all these compounding crises that we have now, and kind of which with the COVID crisis has become so obvious again, this is very much linked to this economic model, and therefore we propose as a term, rogue capitalism. And we had a publication, what you see on the right side is a publication where we kind of explain a bit more about this. We have several cases. But I think today will be a great opportunity also to hear from people who are in the front lines, in the trenches of these struggle. And as I said, we are living a moment of crisis. And I think today's webinar, I hope, will be insightful to see kind of how that plays out, and also what people are doing. And with that, I would hand over to Shalmali so that she can introduce our panel, and we can go into the first round and hear from our great speakers. Thank you very much.
Philip, you're there. Okay, can everybody hear me? Just put a thumbs up if you can, right? Okay. So again, yeah, okay, good. So good afternoon. I'm joining you from India in the aftermath of a cyclone. So I have a quite weak internet connection. So if I'm choppy, my apologies. I'm Shalmali Guttal. I'm with Focus on the Global South. Yes, so both Sylvia and Philip have already introduced how the three organizations, Focus, Transnational Institute, and FIAN, have worked together on the issue of rogue capitalism and financialization. Before we go into the panel, let me just clarify a couple of things. Just present why what we hope to, what are the main objectives that we would like to achieve in this webinar. Now, rogue capitalism and financialization is rampant across the world. It's one of the most powerful and dangerous threats to people's and to community rights, to their lands, to territories, to livelihoods, and to the future of, to future generations, because of the extreme power of finance capital and the challenges in trying to discipline it. Now, because of different local, country, and regional contexts, the manifestations of rogue capitalism are very particular to locations and places. But of course, there are also commonalities, because the forces, the predatory forces of finance capital, they are the same. They take different forms, and they manifest in different countries and different locations, and with different, as they seek new assets to, or as they seek new natural wealth and new capacities and potentials to convert into financial profits. They take different forms, but there are many commonalities also in what, in the impacts, but also in the actors and so on, and the mechanisms by which they do it, as Philippe has already explained how financialization is working and moving across the world. So what we were hoping today is that we have two broad objectives. One, the first is to understand the variety of impacts, actors, and mechanisms of rogue capitalism, and then learn about struggles and strategies used by communities and organizations in different countries. Because although finance capital is powerful and often works in tandem with the state, it's not going unchallenged or unresisted. People, communities, societies, social movements, civil society organizations organize and fight for their rights. And a fight for a land grab, to stop a land grab or to stop a mining project is equally a fight against the powerful financial actors who are financing it, as we see in hydropower or urban infrastructure, special economic zones, and so on. So we would also like to learn from our speakers, what are people doing and what are communities doing to counter these? Now, we have a short time today to discuss a very complex issue, but we also hope that our conversation today can catalyze more exchanges among social movements and civil societies from different regions on how to challenge and discipline rogue capitalism. So moving to our speakers, from who we have 5 speakers who are going to give us a variety of experiences and context. I would first like to introduce Mr. Zainal Arifin Fuad from the Serikat Petani Indonesia, the Indonesian Peasants Union. So Zainal, a question to you. Over the last 10 years, there's been a lot of mobilization around the world against land grabbing. Now, based on the land struggles in Indonesia, can you give us an example of how this global land grab is linked to international financial actors, and how does this affect rural communities in Indonesia? So over to you, Zainal, and I request you to keep your inputs to about 5 minutes, because we will come back for a second round of inputs to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Salma Ali, also Philip, Sylvia, for inviting me in this good event. So, and then following the question, the first question, yes, we can say I will have a hard struggle since 2011 until now, if it is a 10 years. So in that time, we have so many enemies, especially on the land issue. One, of course, is about the land market. It's supported by World Bank. So World Bank with our government to have program for land certification, but it is also, we can say, it is the first the land bank for investment, because in 2007 our government had the new law on investment. So there are many areas for foreign corporation to get land land concession, especially for plantation for palm oil, and then also for selling with the climate change project. This is and then of course this produce agrarian conflict in some province in Indonesia, especially in our member Indonesian Peasant Union. So there is also have also there were many free agreement, including SEPA, EPA, and this like red carpet on the for the investment, and also many land infection because of the big program of infrastructure, highway, tourism, airport, and also in 2011 or 2014 there is a big project or the large scale of agriculture. We let's say food estate, and then this program also come again because we know that this program, the food estate, was failed, and then but now in the new government from Jokowi, start this year they build a food estate in several province in Indonesia. So for 10 years actually we have two regime. So 2009 until 2014 this is Babang Susilo Yudhoyono, and then 2014 until now is the Jokowi. But generally they are same. They are pro with neoliberalism. In fact, there's so many big program in the infrastructure, tourism, airport, megapolitan, so like a free trade zone, and also as I said before, a food estate in Kalimantan, and also in North Sumatra. So I think this summary for our problem in Indonesia, and of course we have many ways to struggle for our land, including we have a big mass rally, especially in 24 September. It is the National Peasant Day, and also we have many public policy, and also and the time in 2011 and in 2013 the International Secretariat of Labor Cabisina in Jakarta. So we conducted a global conference on agrarian reform. So this to analyze what our enemy, the new phase of enemy on the land agrarian reform. So I remember the article of Petroset about the good, bad, ugly of agrarian reform on the World Bank policy, especially in Indonesia. So this like the sieving issue, the agrarian reform from the left issue and to the right issue. So this is our challenge in our land struggle. I think that's all, Salami, so we can continue in the discussion. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Zainal. Over to you, Philip.
Yes, thank you, Zainal. I think already quite some things that you mentioned in your intervention about the different types of sectors that are affected: agriculture, infrastructure, tourism. I think also the link that you make to the policies and the change of policies from, let's say, the agrarian reform policies to really kind of investment promoting policies, and also the different actors that you mentioned. You know, at some point you mentioned also the World Bank, which kind of I didn't mention in my introduction, but obviously there's also these elements of international financial institutions. So I think that gives us already quite some elements, and I would from there just hand it over to Morgane Audy, who is joining us from France, where she's a peasant farmer, a vegetable farmer, and she is a member of the peasant organization Confédération Paysanne, and also a member of the coordination committee of the European coordination of Via Campesina. And what just Zainal told us, and there has been a lot of obviously media coverage and work around land grabbing. I think it's always important also to see that those issues are also very important and very relevant for the European context, something we speak less about, land grabs and land concentration specifically. And maybe Morgane, could you tell us a bit more also about how this land concentration, land grabbing trends in Europe and in France specifically are also related to financial actors, financial markets, and financialization? That would be great. Please, Morgane, you have the floor.
Hello to all, and Philippe, and thanks Shalmali for organizing this workshop. Yes, indeed, there is also land concentration and land grabbing in Western countries. First, I need to recall that in France, there are several public policies on land use and land ownership, and these policies have all been shaped after World War II. At that time, there was a very strong concentration of land ownership in the end of aristocracy, of big landlords. And after World War II, with the pressure made by the Communist Party, several policies were implemented. We can say that it was a kind of very soft agrarian reform with no expropriation, but new rules that could allow a better sharing of land with time. So these policies, it's first a strong land tenure policy, which gives very strong rights for the farmers who rent the land. Second, it's a strong regulation on land use. If you want to use land in France, whether you are the owner or the renter of this land, or whether you have no relation with this land, you need a public authorization. And if you don't have it, even if you are the owner, you cannot cultivate the land. So it's a very strong policy. And finally, the most well-known maybe of these policies is SAFER, S-A-F-E-R, which is the possibility to break any land selling in order to redirect the land ownership to a candidate which is considered with more priority. So if my neighbor sells the land to another neighbor, and when he sells the land, I can ask the SAFER to say, hey, I think that I have the priority, so he should sell the land to me. So these are the three tools. And they have been very efficient in order to allow farmers to become the main owners of agricultural land in France, and also in maintaining accessible prices for land. Agricultural land in France, it is at least 2 times less expensive than what is the price in Belgium or in Germany or in Spain. So these policies have had a very strong effect. Yet they are now very serious. These policies are very seriously put under pressure by share deals. This is when someone becomes the owner of land, not by buying directly a plot of land, but by buying company shares, which include land. And over 1 million hectares of agricultural land are sold in France every year, of which more than 600,000 are sold now via share deals, far more than the 440,000 hectares sold just directly as land plots. So it's not a marginless phenomena. It's most of the land is sold right now in France through share deals. And these deals cannot be controlled through the policies that I just presented to you. SAFER does not have the right to preempt company shares. The control of land use does not apply to landowners if they don't cultivate themselves the land. And even if they are the land users, it's so much untransparent that most of the time it doesn't work. And finally, land tenure also is affected because landowners don't want to rent land to farmers anymore. They prefer to have it worked by agricultural companies, so they receive the cap payment, the subsidies, but without having to do the work. So this is a strong problem because we had a policy which we were criticizing, but which was still working quite well in order to share better the land. And now this financialization of access to land has broken all these policies. So we have a very strong problem. The good news is that it's not only Confédération Paysanne and the small farmers organization which are criticizing this process. Also many MPs and agricultural economists which see this land concentration on grabbing as destroying the production of wealth. And you know, most of our economists are very much obsessed with growth. And France is an important agricultural country. And so this is destroying added value, because when there is land grabbing and land concentration, the agricultural practices move from diversified farming, which includes production of vegetables, crops, and also livestock production, to monoculture of arable crops, which create much less value and much less jobs as well as diversified farming. So this is a threat also for the country wealth in a way. And this is the reason why there have been proposals to stop this process, but I think I can talk about this in a later on discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Morgan. Well, financialization does not only concern land, because finance capital is after anything, any potentiality, any capacity, any wealth that's available that it can then convert into financial profits, you know, over in several processes of alienation. Now, in the context of seas and oceans, financialization is very commonly pushed in the name of the blue economy, which has many impacts, including an increase in intensive aquaculture. So our next speaker is Kun Revadi Prasad Charoensok, who is the director of the Sustainable Development Foundation in Thailand, and has for many years been a rights defender and a supporter of the fisher movements in Thailand and in fact across Asia. She's also one of the leading members of the WFFP, the World Forum of Fisher Peoples. So Kun Revadi, welcome, and Badiha, thank you for joining us. My question to you, our question to you today is, can you tell us about the intensive aquaculture in Thailand, how it affects small-scale fishers and fish workers, and any connections you see between this and the actors who are pushing the blue economy? Over to you, Kun Revadi. Kun Ka, you need to unmute your mic. Your mic is still muted.
Swadika, good afternoon and good evening. I would like to share with you two cases to read evidence on the effect of capitalism and financial types of direction and the effect to small-scale fisher in Thailand. You know that Thailand, in terms of national policy, so many government change, but then the common concept of so many government remain promoting capitalism with the belief that that is the prosperous of the country, increasing income, and increasing production, and also export-oriented putting the production for international market, and then we gain economic development or country development. That is the belief. And from all of this, if you understand the nature of Thailand, Thailand is agriculture country. So it means that the resources, water, land, coastal resources, and biodiversity actually are the source of livelihood and income of majority, more than 70% of the people in the country. But then with the trend of development, these resources had been, grabbed from both the well-off family in the country, where they have also connected to the international market. But at the same time, the government also invite investment from so many of countries to invest in Thailand in many different kinds of investment, including the expanding certain area for industry. And for industry, they use the coast because it is convenient for them for transportation of the product to the world market. And that is a very good example in Chantaburi, in the eastern part of Thailand, that the government, without really the real consultation with the people and no clear governance, they just only very clear target of expanding the industry and company. And so many of the coast area had been allocated for from agriculture for pineapple activity of so many of local family in the area to industrial area. And then from that, when you have industry, you also need to have the kinds of port for international, for the maritime transportation. And from that, they also construct number of ports. And then this is the real case that the port, the constructed at the coastal area. And the coastal area, when we are rural community, so many of people there are small scale fishers. And when they start constructing the port, they are also constructing in the same area where people use for their fishing, for their food, for their income, for the welfare of the family. And it had been evidence from our research together with people that in that particular area that used to be an area for fishing of small scale fisher, right now 80% of them are somehow no job. They are pushed out of the fishing activities. And then some of them who do actually aquaculture, but the small scale, the family aquaculture, they also are not able to continue their aquaculture because they keep expanding so many number of ports. So I think this is really a conflict over the use of the area of the resources, and it really creates that non-formal sector like small-scale fisher are never recognized as the non-power economic of the majority of the country. That is one case. And it had been very clear with the money, with the idea of capitalism, with the international market. And another one in Surat Thani in the south. People of Thailand, the government believe that aquaculture, that is very good activity because you don't have to use the natural coastal resources for fishing. You can increase the production, and it can easily control because it is not in many areas. So they have very clear policy of promoting aquaculture. And then at the beginning, that is what I'm saying. Actually, I should have mapped, but then just to encourage you to come to Thailand later on after COVID. Surat Thani is very beautiful country and very rich of many different coastal resort, many different fish, shrimp, oyster, so many things in nature, and the people use that for their living as well. And aquaculture, they have fishing in coastal area. And then they also have aquaculture as the family activities, additional income. But then with the government saying that, okay, let's promote investment aquaculture. At the beginning, they say that, okay, people, you come together as cooperative, and then we're going to allocate certain area in the area where you use for fishing. So you don't have to go and fishing anymore very far. You just have this certain area under the name of seafood bank. And then they divide the area and then say that, okay, you do this. But they are only promoting for people to use the coastal resource for aquaculture. No market, no management in market, no management in terms of helping people to really, if they believe in aquaculture, they should also have kinds of learning capacity and the money and market and production, those kind of things as the whole circle. But okay, only allocate the land. And now later on, after 10 years, 20 years, it is really clear now that the certain area that had been allocated for aquaculture now, at the beginning about 10% of the total area of that Gulf, now it is about 49% area using for aquaculture. And when we investigate who actually own and use that area, it become an outsider, non-fisher. So the beginning, there had been a turnover. The small scale are not able to continue because they have no capital, they have no skill, they are not able to control the market, and they have really not able to ensure that they're going to, sell on the product they raise. And illegally, there have been a change and turnover from non-farmer. So right now, in that particular area, majority of the small scale fisher, about almost 10,000 family, they have used the area, not even about 40% are used for fishing, because there is the area that they can get food, get money. But then in aquaculture, that beginning, they are used to just like a starter, additional income, but no, not anymore. So it become really an evidence that promoting investment in aquaculture, it is really, destroy the life of the people. They are not able, they are very poor now. They used to be a very well off small scale fisher in Thailand because we have very rich coastal resources, but now they are poor. They so many debt, increasing debt, and then women, you see that what they can do for that. This is the situation. So it become a conflict of area, and then the area that used to be very prosperous, really very abundant, now it is depleting, and this really, destroying the quality of that coastal resources. So I just want to share with you that when you the people have false belief that increasing income, increasing capital, and using resources, and not recognizing the right of the small scale fisher, not recognize non-economic sector, just looking for formal sector and more money, more income. We definitely, I mean small scale fisher, we are now not only these two provinces, but all over countries, small scale fisher are suffering from promoting commercial fisher, from promoting the industry, from promoting maritime transportation, from promoting investment in aquaculture. So I think it had been very clear that capitalism, and I really like the slide that Philip showed. It is very clear, evident that it's just exactly what you say. Take away resources from the people, make people poorer. And those who have already well off, already rich, they're getting richer and richer. And then the people who have no way to make choice of their life, they have no skill, that they are really in suffering. So I think this is the situation of promoting investment in aquaculture and the blue economy activity in my country. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ravati, for sharing this also this perspective more from coastal communities, fishing communities, and which also makes us understand a bit like Shalmali said, right? Like the finance capitalism, this huge amount of capital that is floating around that is using different kind of, what is framed often as investment opportunities, right? And so, and I think it's also important that you said that, like, on this issue of, that it's sometimes like aquaculture being presented as, it solves issues of overfishing and it promises of better livelihoods, but in the end, it becomes like, another way of, extracting. So from the fishing side, we moved to yet another sector, and it seems like we're trying to cover a lot of things, but I think that's precisely what we're trying to do here. And you spoke a lot about, we've heard a lot already about, the destruction also of livelihoods of people, and I think in that sense, it's also important to speak about the mining and energy sectors, which is one of the sectors that is most polluting and having huge impacts on communities around the world, and even where we now talk about transiting to more sustainable models, greening the economy. It's something that is here to stay. It's a huge sector, and I would like to hear what Denis Zizko has to say. The experiences you can share from Bosnia, because you have been an activist or working on these issues for many years, and I would love to hear a bit about what the impacts of the mining energy sector in Bosnia are, and also how you see the links to international finance, international capital, and how that affects the people. Please, Denis, go ahead.
Yes. First of all, thank you for the invitation. And I have to say, when I got the invitation, I actually had to Google the term to understand before replying positively on the invitation to participate in the panel. So great job. And actually, when going through the explanation of the term and listening to your explanation, I think there's one thing which is missed in the whole concept of rogue capitalism or whatever, a missed asset, and that is actually the political influence as an asset, which is exactly what is happening in my part of the world. I'm talking about Southeast Europe, where Bosnia is placed, where you have the situation. Just short background, there are several countries which are trying to join the EU, European Union. They are part of Europe, but not part of European Union. And in this process, they have to go through several structural reconstructions or governance and everything else. But they're also an interesting target for certain countries, like, for example, China or Russia, to be used as a possible backdoor to EU decision-making processes. And that's where we come to this influence of money, and money being used for this political influence. We have a situation with the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, which I'll use here for the example, where there are several millions offered to especially these countries for loans or investments in certain projects, where it was obvious that the countries will actually not be in a position to return these loans. I can talk about the case here from my hometown, from Tuzla, where a loan for construction of a new coal power plant was actually agreed by the Chinese bank. And the guarantee for that loan was provided by the government. The fact is that Bosnia has agreed on decarbonization and the same path that EU is taking. So we have to decarbonize everything by 2050. We have that commitment. And then on the other hand, we have an investment in a facility which will definitely not be profitable. At the end, the government will have to return the loan to the Chinese. So and we've seen similar examples, for example, in the Chinese money coming into Greece, investing in ports in Greece, and basically managing to control the decision-making processes in EU by having these financial influences in, let's call them, weaker member states. So I see the actual countries of Southeast Europe as a future weak member states of EU that could be influenced by China due to these loans which we could not return. A similar situation we have also with loans and finances coming from Russia. Again, in the same area, be it in agriculture or various sectors. The problem there is, well, there are two problems. First of all, most of the governments in these areas are corrupt governments. So it's to have something like this, a system like this being implemented, you need a fruitful soil. And in this sense, it is basically corrupt or easily corrupted governments, which do not look beyond the next election cycle or beyond the well, whatever 2-year term. So, and it's sort of present in the whole area. The way how to fight that, I'll talk about it later. But the thing is that by investing or providing investments and funds for these projects, they're actually destroying the economies of the country. They're destroying they're supporting the destruction of environment. And then they're also supporting the destructions of water, agricultural land, and everything else. So in a way, the banks or the countries which are supporting these initiatives do not really care about the asset, the actual asset, the facility that they've provided the loan for, or the mining sector or whatever, because they're fully aware of the fact that these sectors are going to close in the next few decades. So there is no interest in real financial interest in these sectors, but rather there is this political asset or political influence asset. The reason for that is simple. I mean, we all know that China and Russia they have lots of money. So they can spare a lot of money to provide these loans. And in the case of China, of course, they have lots of production capacities and lots of workers they have to find jobs for. So the conditions of these loans are also that most of the money has to, in one way or the other, return to the countries, to China, whereby they condition the implementation of these projects by Chinese workers and supply of materials or whatever is needed with materials produced in China. So I don't know if I went over 5 minutes or that's it. I hope that gave you an idea of this aspect of this rogue attack, financial attack on these countries.
Thank you, Dennis. It did, and in fact, the asset class, the political influence asset class that you brought up is extremely important. Not only the Chinese government or state enterprises or firms in China, but financial companies, corporations, hedge funds, they employ people specifically for that, as we know, for a long time, in terms of capturing regulation, doing advocacy, lobbying, and yes, a lot of other kinds of incentives that are given to regulators in order to be able to take control of regulatory decisions. So this actually gives us Dennis's presentation gave us a very good segue to move into other ways in which finance capital and rogue capitalism is operating, not only in the sectors of land, territory, water, and resources. So a very important way in which finance capital is operating is through actually providing financing in the form of small loans, large loans, microcredits, so on and so forth. And one way or another, financialization and raw capitalism is extracting wealth from communities and channeling that wealth to financial markets. If it's not from land, another entire area that they have moved into, for a long time, supported by institutions such as the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank, is that, yes. Yes. So my question now on this issue is to Ms. Rosakunti, who is from Cambodia with focus on the global south. Can you hear me clearly? I'm sorry,
yes, your internet is interrupted.
Yes. Sorry. Yes. Okay. So Cambodia is a very well-known case, Kunti, of what has happened with microfinance, microcredit, and the relationship between finance capital and indebtedness. So can you tell us about the way in which microcredits and so-called financial inclusion are used to make profits from people's needs? And how has this increased poverty and vulnerability in Cambodia? Over to you, Kunti.
First of all, I would like to thank you all for joining us, and thank you for the question. Before responding to the question, let me provide you a brief background of how the financial flow begin and work in Cambodia. After some years of war and conflict, which include the US and Vietnam War and the Khmer Rouge, to end the conflict and rebuild the country, the fast-track economic restructuring was undergone. As the result, Cambodia have adopted and implemented the economic liberalizations in 19. So I think that it's not different from the other country in the region. The international financial institution that we know, World Bank and IMF, and in the Asian is the ADB and other bilateral donor, or known as at the time like the donors such as US, Japan, Australia, European Union had played a part of economic restructuring process, and especially with their loan and aid conditionality and technical assistance. So from that, the sectoral reform was among the national economy restructuring. What I want to say is the financial and banking sector reform was not exceptional. The government have been annexed the legislation, adopt policy, creating institution, adapting procedure as a part of financial sector reform. So from the year that 1999 up to now, I can say like which include the additional reform, the government with the technical support from ADB come up with the blueprint, or known as the Financial Sector Plan 2001 and 2010. So this blueprint said to achieve the number of goals. One among those is a pro-poor and effective rural financial system for providing affordable financial service to enable the poor to enhance rural income and reduce poverty, was set up as the second priority. So from that, the microfinance program comes to play. So I give you the one example. One of the earlier microfinance institution named Association of Agency for Economic Development Cambodia. Everybody in Cambodia knows that ACLIDA. It was set up in 1993 with the support from the International Labour Organization and UNDP. So ACLIDA has later become the private specialized bank in 2000. So by then we have been known that they have the asset, because we are talking about the moving of finance and the how they have asset and how the wealth have been accumulated. So the asset by the time is 4 million, and then when it becomes to the private commercial bank, so the asset increase because of other joint venture and support, and then up to $16 million. So I will tell you how they are coming up until today is $6,000 million. So Aklida was previously known as the local organization with an office in Phnom Penh, with its mission to provide and support the poor household the accessibility to credit through their microcredit program had expanded so much. To date, they had operated 262 offices across the country, and it have opened 38 branches in Laos and 17 branches in Myanmar. So it's quite very impressive, you know. Aklida is used an example here to reflect the development of microcredit program and other microfinance institutions grow in Cambodia. So Aklida has also become the champion. Cambodian leads to be the proud of private commercial bank as well as the role model for many other microfinance institutions. And it may be proud of the great outcome of its bank's donor, because I mentioned earlier is the ILO, UNDP, you know, they are very proud on that. So the question should be asked, how a small micro credit program like Aklida arise to the stage, and why have they grown so much and so fast? The problem have been pointed out by the number of household and community, both in various study and the group that we have been work with. They said they charge with very high interest rate and the loan condition. So since the beginning of the microcredit, I can say like more than 20 years ago, the charge of interest rate of the microfinance institution, not just only Asilida, but the other as well, which include the local NGO operation at the time, the charge is 3 to 4% per month, and 36 to 48% a year. It seems, they still think that it seems very better choice for the borrower. But what is still the problem? I can say like the compares to the private money lender, which they charge 10 to 20% a month, or 120% up to a year. So those will compare very bad to the boss. So from that interest rate, it make them very reachable. So they can join with the market share. They have many things in hand, joins the international bank, financialization. So they put the asset, they have the share, they have the bond. So there are a lot of things that have been impacts to the community. Although the interest rate charged by the MFI or private bank consider low than the money lender, but the people income status in the least developing year, I can say like the interest charge is considerably high. Even though some of the loan were borrowed to use to start the small business, such the interest rate charge place the burden on the borrower. And it's not to mention those who are borrowed for their healthcare or related to health spending and food or their children studying. So the other impact is like the condition of the loan lead the borrower and community to financial stress, loss of their property. Well, at the many years, the community land, water, natural resources also have confiscated to corporate, company, rich and powerful people, and the development agenda project or through the economic land concession. Apart from that, the impacts for the children of the family for migration to seek job, and then those they can go to work is like garment factory worker, construction worker, fishing boat, where there is no protection and exploitation. And other impact is like some family they reduce food for consumption from 3 times per day, and then to just only 1 or 2 times per day. And then for the children have been dropped from school and emotional stress. Let me give you just only more 2 points. From our co-study on the impact of COVID-19 on small-scale farmers, so that they had experienced challenges to repay back the debt. even in the time where most of them have already struggled that they want to bring food to eat for their family, but the loan is like hindering them. Since most of the economy sector affected by the epidemic, I can say like most of the borrowers are not able to earn their income to pay back the loan, but number of borrowers are increasing. Borrowers continue to borrow from other sources for the first or second loan payback and continue until they are debt bounded. It has driven a rising number of borrowers, I can say like to sell their property. And then I assumption that that is not only Cambodia, but the other country as well, is that you can see the announcement on the Facebook or other news that a lot of people are lining up to sell their property in order to pay back the bank. So this is what I would like to share, and then we can continue our discussion.
Thank you so much, Sukunti. This was for bringing also in some light, sharing some concrete examples of this aspect, as Shalmali said, which is sometimes, in the language of the institutions is presented as financial inclusion. But I think it became very clear again from what you said, this aspect of, extracting from, and maybe here in this case of the microfinance, it becomes so, the cynical nature of the entire system becomes so visible because it's people that have already so little and still like the little they have is still extracted to be channeled like into this financial markets. And I also think it's very important that you made the link to the COVID pandemic now. And I think because it's some of these things that there is not so much in the media, but it's kind of having really great impacts on people. So we had a like a big panorama now, and kind of have touched many aspects. It's very interesting. Time is going by quickly. It was really interesting to have that first round. I would still like to have like a short second round with all of our panelists, because I think as of now we have more spoken about about the problems, about the challenges, about what is happening. But we all know that like people are also resisting. People are organizing. People are kind of building up solutions, building are strategizing. And I think I would like to have a second round just where every one of you just shares a glimpse of how people are mobilizing. I think it's clear that strategies are very broad, probably, like there are different things that people are doing, and the resistance has always been there, right? But I think the mechanisms that we have a bit spoken about make it sometimes a bit more difficult because some of the actors that are involved are not actually visible. And before just kind of giving the floor back to all of you, is I also think that when we hear about you, it's obvious that we're speaking about very different contexts, right? And the context in different countries, different cultures where you work in are very different. So obviously, like I think strategies will also depend on that. But yeah, maybe I would like to ask each of you to just share a very, like maybe just one example. I mean, not like a full-fledged strategy, but something that like concretely that you see that people have been doing and that has worked or not. If you can just share, as I see also that some people are already asking a bit the questions like what to do about it. And maybe you can share just a glimpse of what communities are actually already doing. And maybe this time we can change a bit the order, if you agree. And I would just maybe give the floor first to Ravadi. So Ravadi, if you could just share just one example of how communities, you with the communities, you're trying to push that back and build like the basis of something different.
Only one example. We have many.
Yes, in the interest of time.
I think first of all, I think it is very important for us that the people not look at it as okay, we have accept as it is, but we have to go back to the root as human being, as the person, that we should have the right to decide in our own life, in our own community, where we used compared to the past, where we used to have more choice of our life, where we share each other resources, where we not really have so many depth, where we are not really rely on money only for our life. So the conscientization, awareness raising on what exactly are we accepting as it is the trend of development, or what we should do. So we in Thailand we have in of course in different area we may have different way of doing, but then basically we are exercising ourselves if that okay, we don't like aquaculture this way nah? And the type of aquaculture, what exactly do we want. So we have to consult among those who are using resources, and then we apply ecosystem approach. So it means that it is not only one individual who have long hand and then you grab more of resources, but then we have to discuss among ourselves, okay, this is the situation, how we going to do to you know solve it. At the community level, we are more of consulting each other and then try to demonstrate what we think it should be done. So why we are advocating at national level, at the community level, we do conservation of resources, we talk with the people, we invite people that, okay, this is conflict, we provoke, okay, this is something that we need to remove, and this is area that we want to take it back as the common property. It is not a property, or it is not the coastal resources. Only few family get, you know, access to, and other do not. So we voice out, and then we get the government, we get the private to talk about it. And then from that, we are now in the process of be able to the conflict resolution process. So it means that before we people afraid of talking something, just make other people blame other people. That is something of demonstrating community action, networking among ourselves, and the common solution that, of course, we do not be the one who use that resources, but this is the way that we don't like, what we like. So we have common position, get everyone involved, and then we point out what we would like to have, our livelihood security, we would like to have a quality of life. And those who never open their mouth, they have to speak out. We have to make ourselves visible. So I think that is something that we are doing. And then it is the situation that is happening in particular area. But exactly, we have so many 23 coastal provinces in Thailand. We also reach out to connect with other coastal community. And then we are now trying to, you know, get involved in the formal structure for the fishery committee, national fishery committee member. So we have to really try to be involved in decision making on direction of fishery management that the government will, instead of they are top down direct. We also link micro work at the ground level, and to really point out the long of the idea in the policy and the law that we are, what aspect in terms of law, what we definition of small scale fisher never in the law. We need them to be, you know, visible. We have to really highlight women who never be account as fisher. We have to really push for the statistic to include them. So I think micro macro change for the law policy change, mechanism change, and the way that instead of segregated development, we are advocating for area-based people center and customary right, and also good governance in decision making or whatever development program that coming into the area. And at the same time, we also connect with the international network, small scale fishery network, WWF, WFF, and also many support organizations like TIN, FIAN, Conservier, Focus of the Global South, and many different ICSF, those kind of things, to really influence the FAO. And now we are having a kind of voluntary guideline on small scale, protection of sustainability of small scale fisher, and then reducing poverty eradication, those type of things, and the land tenure guideline. So it means that we also influence the nature or the concept of at international level that somehow influence the policy of the country. So so that is what we are claiming our right. We have to really ensure that our right be recognized, and we need to attack the concept of only formal economy. We are now fighting for non-formal economic system and recognize people to decide at the ground level, advocate for the governance in natural resource management, not segregated or top-down management. And we, whatever issue we advocate at the international level or national level, we do it collectively at the community level. And then we also contact with the academic sector to really prove that doing this way we gain more economic wise, and in terms of social more harmony, reduce conflict. But at the same time, we also be able to prove that if we have proper way of doing fishing, not aquaculture, we have a good quality of coastal resources, we are able to address the depletion of the coastal resources, those kind of things. So I think that is the work that we are doing in the country. And the case of Surat Thani, we are now in the process of conflict resolution process.
Okay, thank you so much, Ravadi. I think, yeah, it's impressive. I understand we have to organize a specific workshop to talk about the strategies. I think probably that's something to take up. But I think I take from your point, especially this the emphasis you put on organizing and networking and building power from the ground up and linking the different levels. Maybe over to you, Dennis. You also kind of the picture you painted before is not. It doesn't seem easy to fight back, but I'm sure you're doing it still. It would be nice just to get a glimpse of how you are doing it and what has worked or what has maybe not yet worked so much.
Yeah, you're right. It's not easy to be the enemy of the state, you know, and to be accused for trying to destroy the economy of the country and everything else. But there are several things you have to be aware of or ready to do when you start something like this, and it can be sort of used in many areas in the world. First of all, you have to be extremely patient, because these are the problems which cannot be solved overnight. And if you think that you are going to do it in a month's time, just forget it. Don't even enter into the fight. And on top of that, you have to be ready to accept losses. So you will lose lots of fights before you start actually winning. So the way, well, basically the thing that I'm working on is, as you mentioned, dirty energy, coal, and that type of industry. And it was initially, well, some 10 years ago when we started with this, it was very, very difficult to convince the people of especially in this area, that coal is bad, because it was traditionally for more than 100 years coal mining area. The coal miner is the symbol of the worker, so you were actually talking about something which was used to develop this area, and you're attacking the worker as such if you're talking against coal. So we have tried several tactics and how to actually sort of gather more support from the general population for the issue, and we came up with the question of health. So you have to find the entry point into the minds of the people. And usually the easiest way to do it is through pollution and health, because those are the direct impacts on life. So everyone can relate to that. Mothers can relate to that. So, you know, you have to of course, choose your focus group. So for the general population, it was health. And then gradually you introduce other aspects of this sector into the narrative, which is predominantly related to health impacts. Then you build on that, and then you add the question of corruption. You know, so you sort of link the health issues and the corruption. So the corruption of the system, which is supporting this sector, is causing health problems to your children. But you have to do it patiently, because at the end we are talking about decarbonization and climate change. No one relates to decarbonization and climate change overnight. So the tactic is choose a subject which is fairly common to everyone, to which everyone can relate, and then gradually introduce other aspects of your campaign into this narrative. As I said, 10 years ago, I was the enemy of the state and didn't have too many allies. I mean, I was a rare beast, you know, almost extinct. Now we have lots of people talking about, after 10 years, we have lots of people talking about pollution caused by burning of fossil fuels. We have lots of people talking about health issues caused by this sector. And fortunately enough, in the last few years, we have lots of people talking about the corruption. I was talking in the previous discussion on the panel, where you have the whole system basically functioning on corruption. So when you introduce, and I'm not talking about the corruption in this sector, I'm talking about corruption in other sectors. So when you have the general population talking about corruption in other sectors, it's a perfect opportunity to, through the narrative you're using, actually introduce the corruption in this sector also. Parallel to that, you also gather the actual legal tools, as we call them. So you have all the documents, and you use inspections, you use ministers, you use at least parts of the system which are functioning to collect the proof for your case. And then you use that proof through the media. Of course, you have to develop very good relations with the media. And then you use media, again, as a tool to present the a proof of corruption and also of health aspects and everything else. So as I said, it's a very long process. You have to be very patient. And at the end of the day, we will succeed, I'm sure. But yeah, thank God that we are young and enthusiastic.
Thank you so much, Dennis. I think, yeah, many interesting points there as well. And because you mentioned the enemy of the state, and there was a question, someone in the chat also asking about this issue. Why do we say rogue capitalism? Is there any capitalism that is not rogue? But this is actually one of the things that when we develop that term, it's that many of the movements and the organizations that work on these issues, obviously they are often put in that situation of being the terrorists, being the criminals, being the enemies of the state. So it's a way also of saying rogue capitalism, just to turn it around, right? And it's not meant in the sense of saying like there's a good capitalism. I don't know. That's another question that was raised. It's a big question. But anyway, coming back to our to the resistance, maybe you can go next, Sukunti. Just share a bit of a glimpse of what you do in Thailand, in Cambodia, on this kind of very, 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 I don't know, difficult issues of the microloans that create so much dependency of the people, right? And kind of they're trapped in there. How do you support them? I think you have to unmute your microphone.
Okay. Thank you for this critical and an important question. And to be frank, it is not easy task at all to respond your question. and especially I can say like in the time of this multiple crisis that we are in now. One of the immediate response that we have employed in our strategy have been being flexible in the ways of working. The impact of the epidemic on the people are real, and some require basic assistance like food and protection equipment are needed. We try our best to support them with our limited resources and capacity. And I can say like last year, within the crisis, some human rights organizations also put forward the statement for the government to intervene in terms of loans that people have in debt. But in return, the response, it quite look good in the beginnings that requirement the microfinance and the bank to put the renewable payment for the borrower. But it's still meaningless, because the government is still side with the bank or micro or MFI. So that is unfortunate. So for us, we continue to ensure people problem are amplified through the research assessment report that we are doing. So we continue to apply both action research, where people are the one who own the process in our study, as well as we sometimes use other form of research to go about the issue. For instance, get our progressive academic friend or research to join us on the board. And we also continue to support who are the confronting at the front with the legal suit or along struggle to reclaim their rights to the land or natural resources with the legal support. And we also continue to support in terms of their require or need. We have continues to join force with other trusted alliance and progressive space to voice out the issue and connecting the community struggles to the platform as well. So this is the strategy that we are so far trying our best within this crisis, and we hope we are doing well. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Sukunti. And yeah, it's not an easy task. I just, in principle, just an announcement. In principle, our time would be over now. We have asked, we have the possibility to stay for a bit longer, if that's fine with everyone. So we invite just the participants to stay for another 10 to 15 minutes so that we can just close this round. And I would still hand it over directly to Morgane. About your struggle, you mentioned the law, that you're working on a law and a specific regulation. I know that you're doing much more than that, but just to share whatever you would like to share about the struggle you have in France to tackle this issue.
Yes, first, I think capitalism is about accumulation, private accumulation, and so we sometimes, and actually most of the time, the governments are working for the people who want to accumulate more, the rich people. But I think that there are really balance of power there, struggles in order to make the government act well or act in favor of the already richest, and it's a permanent struggle, this thing. And in France, we are doing many struggles, but always having in mind that if we want our struggles to have a more permanent result, we need to change the law. For example, when we struggled against GMOs, we destroyed GMO's field, but our goal was to obtain a moratorium that it was forbidden. So I think we always have to have these things in mind, that the struggles in the fields, in the case of GMOs, are a way to win power in order to have new laws which are more protecting for the communities. And this is also the case for land grabbing, even if it's far from easy, because we are not legalists, we are not lawyers, we are farmers, and laws many times it's with details, it's hard, and sometimes it's tricky. But now against share deals and land grabbing through share deals, MP from the majority has proposed a new law against land grabbing, which is being discussed right now. It's at the parliament right now. And this proposal is based on a good idea. The idea is that the buyer of company shares, which includes agricultural land, would have to require an authorization. And without this authorization, public authorization, the deal would have no legal basis. So we are in favor of this principle. We find it a good principle. A big issue is to know who owns what, because as you said in the beginning, Philip, a problem with the financialization is that it makes the owners of the assets very invisible. You can't know anymore who owns what. Yet in 2017, the EU decided to create a register of effective beneficiaries of the companies. And it was not done against capitalism, but it was done against terrorism and money laundering. Because in the context of terrorist attacks, the governments wanted to know who were behind companies in order to try to, well, to see where the money was going and whether it was not financing terrorism. And but this register has been used by journalists to inquire about how rich people hide their money in Luxembourg, for example. It's called the Luxembourg LuxLeaks, we call it. I don't know if you heard about it. So it was useful for us. And now this MP, he believes that we can also use this register to know who is behind the company and who owns which land. Because the idea of this law is that if you are over a threshold of land, for example, if you own more than 200 hectares of land, you would have to require an authorization. If you own only 2 hectares, you would not have to. But in order to know who owns more than 200 hectares, it's not easy. You really need to find in this register of effective beneficiaries who owns what. So, so we believe that these tools, they are useful and they can make the policies powerful again, because all this financialization, the goal of it is to make the policies powerless and the communities powerless. And then you think, what can we do? What can we do except violence? And it's not what we want. We don't want to go through overall violence. We want just to live peaceful lives with on the land and being able to have decent revenues of our work. And for this, I think it's very important to make laws powerful again, to find ways to make it possible to stop financialization, to know who is behind these companies, in order to be able to give back these resources to the communities who need them. So it's more or less the general philosophy of it. Actually, we are not very happy with this law proposal because the thresholds are very, very high, much higher than what is required for normal farmers to buy land normally. So we find that very unequal. And the risk of this law that we see is to give legal washing to finalization and land grabbing. So that's where I say that we say in French, the divide is in the details. I hope that you understand. But at least working on the laws, on the legal basis is also something that obviously we need to do if we want to create more permanent, successful stories, or not just win a struggle and then you need to win the struggle again in another place. Thank you.
Thank you, Morgan, and yeah, also for this call a bit to reclaim the public policies. Zainal, you opened the round and you'll have the honor to close it as well. Yeah, I know also SPI is doing a lot of things in Indonesia, but maybe there's one thing you could share. I mean, I know also that you have already also had to face issues of criminalization of leaders. So yeah, if you just could share an example or some of the work that you are doing in Indonesia.
Okay, thank you very much, Philip. Yes, by now, SPI has about 156 agrarian conflict based on open plantation, forest, infrastructure, and others. So, and one and or two case of those that now one leader of SPI already given a license and given a license and already taken to the jail. This is because our struggle against the green job of the rubber project by corporation subsidiary from French company. We already fight, but I think that there are many strong pressure to our government. So finally we lost. But now we still struggle to continue our effort to make our leader free. And then another case is about our struggle against the RIDD project in Jambi province. And now there are 19 peasant member of SPI and still process. Of course, we are fight this. And then in terms of our in law, actually SPI with other allies already success to have many law. One is the law the law of food, the law of peasant protection and empowerment, and then the law of horticulture, and then the law of land provision for sustainable agriculture. It is a good law for pro peasant, and even our government Jokowi agree to distribute land about 9 million hectares for peasant and poor people. But unfortunately, there are many pressure. So why by now this program are not fully operated, and then and now we struggle for to have agricultural solution. So and now SPI invited by president to become a team to overcome agrarian conflict. So in this our opportunity for us to solve our to get a good good resolution for our land. And then in the same time, we also start to socialize our UN drop. This is our struggle from village in Indonesia until international level. So this is our tool of struggle on right to land. But in other side, there are also big challenge. You know? In November last year, our government launched the neoliberal, super neoliberal law. That is the law of the job creation. This is a red carpet for investment, because in this law, our government agreed to change some law of food, law on business protection and empowerment, and the law of horticulture because of WTO. And also in this law, our government start to have land bank, and also it is easy to conduct. It is easy to import food. So this is our big problem now. It means that before we have a good 5 good laws, but because of the new law, it is like a dark era for us. But now we still optimistic to struggle under UN drop, and also and our opportunity in the team in overcoming again conflict. So this is our opportunity to get our right to land. So this Philip for our struggle on land by now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zainal. So it's very clear from all the strategies and actions that all of you have presented in terms of resistance and challenging rogue capitalism and financialization. They range all the way from direct occupation, direct action, to getting community involvement with local government, to policy change, reclaiming public policy, public spaces, reclaiming laws, getting dialogues and the whole society involved, getting the media involved, and building our, providing direct support to those who are indebted, helping them to work out their own community systems, but at the same time, never losing sight that people have a right to governance and that people should, have a right to reclaim that governance. So there's a range of strategies there. So thank you very much. And as I said earlier, this is a very complex topic, and we had only 90 minutes, and we've gone already over time to discuss such a complex topic. And all the 5 speakers, you've done a brilliant job of helping us guide, see the complexity of this entire landscape. So what I'd like to do is, we don't have time for the Q&A really, but let me just read the questions so everybody gets a sense of what kinds of thoughts are being triggered. So Shikhar Agarwal wrote, do you think capitalism can be reappropriated in favor of communities, or must it be ditched completely? And we should shift our focus to alternative economic models instead. He says, I'm guessing it's very context specific and some amount of embeddedness will always exist. You would love to learn more about what the panelists think. So unfortunately, we don't have time for this, for a response from you. They think of whether we should reappropriate capitalism and make it work for our society, or ditch it and work towards alternatives and alternative economic models completely. There's a question from Gulzar Khan saying, is our agriculture the main capitalism issue? Are there also others? No? Then there's a question from Amir Mahmood saying, as I know, Thailand is a great country in fisheries progress in the world. Could you tell us about transition of fisheries from capture fisheries to aquaculture that involves capitalism or financialization? How does financialization work in transition capture to aquaculture of fisheries from one ecological crisis, that is depletion, to another crisis? So I think to some extent, Kun Revati has already touched on these issues. And all the speakers have shown that agriculture is not the only capitalist, there are others as well. But what I'd like to suggest is that if there is interest among those of you who are on this in this webinar to continue this dialogue, to continue these conversations, let's do that outside of, the AEPF has given us a good platform to start, but let's continue these dialogues outside as well. And our colleagues, Yifang, have put the email addresses of all of Philippe and Sylvia and Katie and myself, and Yifang is also there. So if you are interested, please get in touch with us and we can organize another session or many sessions. And there is also a message from Mr. Tuan Nguyen, who is from Germany. He's a reporter, and he said that he's a journalist reporting on the global south and sustainable economy, and would like to, if anybody you would like to report on all this. So he has put his email in the chat. So my apologies that we can't have a response and a dialogue at this point on the questions. But on behalf of all the co-organizers, I really thank all the panelists for your brilliant and absolutely deep insights into what's happening, and also the inspiring stories of struggle. And I would like to hand over now to Sylvia to just summarize, make some summary points, and have close the webinar. And again, from our side, thank you very much to all the panelists and to all the participants and attendees for this very interesting conversation. Sylvia, over to you.
Indeed, thank you very much. And it was such a rich conversation. So I'm definitely not going to summarize anything. I just very, very briefly wanted to show you something that, because I was very inspired by when everyone was speaking. So I was doing some artistic kind of visual, trying to capture what everyone was talking about. So I was just going to show you my screen here. So I was just capturing a little bit what the richness, the kind of vastness, the panoply of issues that we really touched on in this workshop, hearing from different contexts from Indonesia, France, Thailand, Bosnia, Cambodia, all these ways in which finance capital manifests itself in these different contexts, but with some common actors, mechanisms, and impacts. So I've just listed some of the specific actors that were mentioned there. We talked about various mechanisms, share deals, land markets, geopolitical influence, policies promoting intensive aquaculture. We heard about all the different kinds of impacts on people's livelihoods, on the degradation of natural resources, conflicts, abandonment, financial stress, destruction of agricultural wealth, etc. But we also heard from some resistance strategies, and we had some really nice quotes from our speakers, which I've also, with permission, just captured some nice speakers there about we don't need to accept things as they are. We have the right to decide, from Ravadi, who said that. On the other hand, we have to be extremely patient, from Dennis, cautioning that these are struggles that are there for the long haul. To have a more permanent result, we have to change laws. We have to reclaim public policies, as Morgan mentioned. And resistance happens at both the micro and macro level through community organizing, but also advocacy at international institutions. And there are some specific laws and policy instruments, such as the UN drop, such as this new law against land grabbing and share deals in France, that point to some promising directions. There's a lot more to say, but I will not keep you any longer. Really thank you for indulging us these extra 15-20 minutes or so. The recording of this webinar will be made available on the APF website, and we can also include in that also perhaps this visual that we can share through our social media channels, or make it also available at the APF website to the registrants also of this workshop. So I think with that being said, I just really want to thank our wonderful panelists again for being here. Our interpreter, thank you very much for also being here with us. And of course, my fellow organizers from Focus on the Global South and FIAN International, always a pleasure to be working with you. So to be continued, I hope, in another place at another venue.